Good morning, friends. Well, you and I are all aware of recent events and the yet more chaos that we are in this world and especially in our nation. I want to begin by reading a text from Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. It says, "After this I saw a vast crowd, too great to count, from every nation and tribe and people and language, standing in front of the throne and before the Lamb. They were clothed in white robes and held palm branches in their hands, and they were shouting with a great roar, 'Salvation comes from our God, who sits on the throne, and from the Lamb.'" And friends, I would submit to us, and I know that you know this, but I would submit, and I think it needs to be said, it should be said regularly even, that until we get to this day, the day that is described here, we cannot naively say that I thought racism was behind us. I thought it's something that we have moved beyond as a nation, that we've grown past that. And racism, unfortunately, just like tyranny, just like any other kind of evil, even just like maybe unwanted weight in our midsection, it's one of those things that you're never past. It's one of those things, just like any evil, that we must continually be putting the pressure against. Otherwise, it keeps finding its way in. It finds its way to creep in. And not that it has been ever completely extinguished, but that is just simply the nature of it. And we're seeing it getting the better of us today. And so I believe God has called us. Not only is it a truth that it pushes against us all the time, but God has called us to push back against it, just like any other evil out there. We are called to be proactively pushing against it. I want to share with you out of Luke chapter 10, beginning verse 30. Jesus shares a parable in answer to the question, "Who is my neighbor?" And to that, Jesus replies with a story. Luke 10, verse 30. "A Jewish man traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged him. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, 'Take care of this man. If the bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here.' Now which of these," verse 36, "now which of these 3 would you say was neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits?" Basically, Jesus takes the question of this expert in the law, "Who is my neighbor?" And he takes that question, he turns it around, and he says, "Who is neighbor to this man?" In this parable, basically, you have, of course, you have the victim, a Jewish man who had been beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. And you have 2 other Jews. Not only that, but Jews who serve and minister to the people are passing by. And not only do they pass by this man, but they pass by on the other side of the road. Now you would think at first glance that this depicts a coldness, like oh yeah, they're just avoiding their duty. But that's not exactly what would take place in the mind of a Jewish listener to Jesus' parable. The, the Jewish mind would look at this as, wow, he's a hero because he has overcome his compassion to move on to serve the greater good. Because both of those Jews would have been moved with compassion for their fellow Jew, for their brother who's on the side of the road. But if they were to help him, then they would become ceremony unclean, and they would not be able to minister to the people in the temple. So therefore, all these people, when they get to Jerusalem, would be left without someone to minister that to them and to give them a ceremonial cleansing. So they would be left without. Therefore, keeping in mind and focusing on the greater good. But yet you have the Samaritan who has compassion as well. And despite any barriers, any social barriers or any anything in him that he has against this Jew, he moves forward, has compassion, and ministers to him. In a situation where if the roles were switched, the Jew probably wouldn't do the same for the Samaritan. And Jesus' message, I would say, to this is, don't overthink this loving thy neighbor stuff. You be neighbor to the ones in need on this. And I would say for us today, we are called to be proactively loving our neighbor. It can be easy. I'll admit, it can be easy to think, oh, I didn't realize this was a problem. But that just simply tells me that I am failing to be proactive in this. Because if I'm proactive in this, and if I'm loving my neighbor, I would be aware of my neighbor's, what ails my neighbor. And so, friends, along with that, we do have a duty to love our neighbor and to love our nation as well. I encourage us to seek those opportunities. I would do some heart searching today as far as where we are at with all of this, how we can become more like Jesus in this. Where would Jesus be in the midst of this? And do likewise. And also respond to God's call in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14, which says, Then if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and restore their land. All right, friends, love your neighbor. Not because it will necessarily bring peace, because Jesus didn't restore peace, obviously. It kind of stirred up violence and evil. But that's not why Jesus loved. He loved because that's who he is and because it's the right thing to do. And those are the same reasons why we ought to love our neighbor, and because we are commanded to by our Savior. So friends, let's do it. Let's move forward by his power and do likewise. God bless you all.